Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Garrison, and I want to welcome you to day 264 of Humanity Rising. A couple things to just report over the last couple of days, consistent with our meta theme for Humanity Rising of being aware of the threats to our democracies around the world and the public's right to engage in free and fair elections. Over the weekend, Vladimir Putin, in a speech, announced that he agreed with Donald Trump that the 2020 election was fraudulent and that the people who stormed the Capitol on January 6th of this year were patriots and were treated harshly. So what we have developing around the constitutional crisis in the United States, which we highlighted last Tuesday with Daniel Sheehan, a constitutional litigator, is that this big lie that the 2020 elections were fraudulent is now being reinforced internationally by the Russian government officially. And at the same time, the Republican Party has made voter suppression the central priority for what it seeks to accomplish around the country. So you have not only voter suppression taking place in a vigorous and systematic way in every state legislature in the country in which the Republicans have majorities, and they control 2/3 of the state legislatures around the country. But now you have the Russian government aligning itself with this effort to subvert democracy. So it's a serious development. Donald Trump is going to be starting rallies all across the country at the end of this month, all focused on destabilizing the institutions, the constitutions, and democracy in America. So welcome to Monday. And at the same time, it's good to note, and this is what we're going to be celebrating today, in the midst of all this chaos, in the midst of rising authoritarianism, there are people all over the world that are beavering away 24/7, 365 to bring solutions into the public domain. And the theme today is going to be on solutions in the area of permaculture, ecology, urban land use, because that also is happening in our world. As has been said frequently on Humanity Rising, if you had to condense what's going on in the world right now, things are getting worse and worse, better and better, faster and faster. That's our world. So today we're going to celebrate the better and better. But first, we want to take a pause as we start our program today. Just center yourself in your body. Take a few deep breaths. Feel your aliveness. And close your eyes and place your attention on your heart. Listen to your heartbeat for just a minute in a spirit of gratitude and thanksgiving that you're alive. We're all alive at this most extraordinary moment in the human journey. Thank you, everyone. And now, with an open heart and a heart filled with gratitude and love for each and every one of you who are joining our session today, I want to introduce Jan Spencer. I met Jan a number of months ago through someone in Humanity Rising that said, you've just got to talk to this guy because he's done some extremely interesting work in Eugene, Oregon, in this interface of ecology and regeneration, permaculture, and urban land use. Jan has taken a quarter of an acre and turned it into a shining example of what's possible if people understand alignments with natural systems and are dedicated to raising food and generating a lifestyle in alignment with Mother Earth. So Jan and I talked and we became acquainted, and I was extremely impressed with what he's doing there in Eugene. And so one thing led to another, and Jan has put together a whole panel of people who've been just beavering away, doing good work on the ground, in the earth, literally, to demonstrate how even in urban areas and adjacent areas, we can produce an abundance of what we need to live regeneratively with each other and with the earth. So Jan, welcome to Humanity Rising, and I turn the program over to you.
Well, that's all very, very wonderful introduction there, Jim, and very much appreciate being here from Eugene. And we have Jim in Cincinnati, Jim Schenk in Cincinnati, and Lois Arkin in Los Angeles, and Bob Randall in Houston. And yes, I'm impressed with my fellow panel members as well. So, and thank you very much for Humanity Rising and Ubiquity University for all your outreach. And this takes a lot of work to put together a system like this. Just one real quick comment. I've got notes, but I just wanted to mention this. Before we started, Jim, you used a term that I'd never heard before. And I even wrote it down because I wanted to mention it. It's opportunity vector. That's a really good, it's an opportunity vector whenever you want to tune into it. Opportunity vector. It's a new word in my vocabulary, and I thank you for that. So it's good to be here, and our panel has a lot to share. And Bob, Lois, and Jim each have a set of interests and an impressive track record that have been helping to move their communities and, of course, in that small way, the entire world towards paradigm shift. And paradigm shift, of course, starts in our own lives, what we do with our own time and money. And something that I like to point out with people who are doing the term, you use beavering, another word. I like to use a term preferred future, and a lot of people are already spending a lot of time in the preferred future with the work they're doing and their own habitats they're creating in their homes and neighborhoods. There's a number of common denominators that this panel shares. There's quite a few, but these are three I've identified just to help give us context. And one is we're all interested in repurposing urban infrastructure, and that's both social and built infrastructure. All of us keenly care for the natural world. And I think I can say all of us feel like there's an important need for a very different kind of economics as well. You mentioned Vladimir Putin, and I'm no fan of Putin, but there's a lot going on homegrown in our own country that we have a lot to improve on too, in terms of what do we really consider to be a democracy. The projects and initiatives we all share do fit into previews of a preferred future. And all these actions involve empowering people and taking care of important needs closer to home, and importantly, reducing our ecological footprints. I'll introduce each panel member and they'll describe their interests and actions. We'll do that one at a time. We'll also hear a little bit later about visions, and here's another nice word, anticipated fiction, meaning we'll hear some vision and ideas from the panel members, myself included, of what we think may be happening as we move further in the direction of a preferred future. I'm really excited to share some of those. But first, let me just kind of set a little bit of a make-believe context here. Imagine in the near future when many progressive organizations have realized they all exist largely to repair some kind of social, economic, and environmental damage caused by capitalism and the consumer culture. These hundreds of organizations are realizing they need to work together and educate their members for moving more purposefully towards sustainable lifestyles, society, and economy. And they have enormous untapped energy to put paradigm shift ideas and models out to a wider audience, their own members. So imagine this presentation was organized and hosted by, for the audience, your favorite nonprofit, educational, or public interest organization. The panel members have been asked to show and tell the best they know on behalf of system change. The ideal of this occasion is for those watching to learn from these pioneers so they can adapt what they hear and see to their own lives and advocate perhaps these new ideas to their friends and networks. So, very good. Let's start with Bob. Bob will have a brief interview of his projects and involvements, followed by a short look at several images that help illustrate his comments. And we'll do these one panel member at a time. So I'm going to start out with a brief introduction for Bob Randall. Bob lives in suburban Houston. He has a PhD in food systems anthropology, but decided years ago when he learned about permaculture to devote his life towards creating urban food systems. He started turning his suburban property into a subtropical food forest over 40 years ago, kind of the inspiration for my own version of that here in Eugene. And Bob has written a lengthy handbook about food production in Southeast Texas that could be a model for other regions too. So, Bob, tell us, please, some of the highlights of the great work you're doing there in Houston.
Oh, thank you, Jan. Well, here in Southeast Texas, we have a really abundant rainfall. It keeps raining all the time. A 365-day growing season, and most temperate and tropical food plants grow here. But there are even so 350,000 food desperate people here, and many more eating bad diets produced in far away, low labor cost places out of state, out of the nation. And climate change could make this a whole lot worse. We have 7 million people here, and every one of us is at food risk in a possible climate future. So you've got to do something about it, and there's good things you can do. We started Urban Harvest in 1994 to promote quality food for everyone. And we started with $500. Today it has over $1 million budget. And what does it do? We developed a large community garden system so people had a place to garden if they needed it and could learn how to do it from people who knew how to grow food. We got a large outdoor classroom program at schools in the Sun Belt. School year and good gardening weather is the same time. We developed a huge one-day fruit tree sale that sells up to $150,000 in a few hours worth of fruit trees. People love having good fruit trees, and we figured out how to do that. We teach dozens of adult food gardening classes and use a text I developed. It's now in its 13th edition and sold all over the area in locally owned businesses. We also teach a 100-hour permaculture design certificate course that's spun off a related organization, a 20-year-old nonprofit called OBA, that educates green businesses about topics in sustainable horticulture. How did we do it? Well, we had at least 600 people by my count, all types of people, incomes, cultures, creeds, religions, schooling, lack of it, even political points of view. And they spent more than 5 years of labor, those 600 people together doing it. And so the trick was making sure that whatever differences people have, it didn't get in the way of trying to get quality food for everybody. We created a farmer's market. It took 11 years to get started, but now it's 20 years old and gigantic. And it convinced the population that we really have the ability to have high quality, locally grown food out here. And if you can grow it, you can buy it now. And there's really no reason why everybody shouldn't have it. We are a long way from that, but we've shown that you can do it, and lots of people now know you can do it and are doing it. Permaculture had a big role in this. Permaculture is the idea that all major decisions should be designs that are aimed at future care. Instead of short-term gains like money, property, votes, people make decisions about, it should be focused on what would be the best for the generations in the future. And in permaculture, we don't think you can do that unless you design systems and that care for people, care for Earth, and a fair share. The surplus has to be shared, and if we don't do that, we're going to actually not survive in the long term. Decades ago, the founders of permaculture saw that the only long-term functioning regenerative systems were natural ones like forests, and indigenous ones like the tribal people's long traditions of nature, respect, and care. Our designs use some of these principles as well as modern ideas, solar panels, that sort of thing, and we create satisfying low energy, high yield life systems. And as Jan said, my family has been enjoying that for 40 years now. We produce 90% or so of our own produce and get good exercise and plenty of birds. So what we want to do really is spread permaculture using some of the 50,000 people that have gone through the 100-hour class in North America and so I'm part of an organization, the Permaculture Institute of North America, that's trying to do that by organizing permaculturally designed action across the continent and trying to fund it. And that's about it. I hope I didn't go over my time, Jan.
No, that's very good. So we want to take a look at just a few images here that Bob made reference to. We are not going to spend a lot of time on this, and also good to point out that this presentation will be available to be seen later. You can go back and take a longer look at some of these images, but you'll see in this particular picture on the lower left, that's Bob's home. That's his subtropical food forest. Bob, just tell us very, very briefly what we're looking at here.
Well, that's a corner of a city street, and about 10 feet off that corner, there's a compost pile, although you would never know it. And that's our just front driveway there. There's some grapefruit trees. This picture was taken a few years back. There's a Peruvian apple cactus growing there. And mostly there on the left are all native plants that are designed to attract birds and habitat. Plants,
Okay.
yeah. Anyway.
Okay, Bob, and then, yeah, we have to keep going with this. But then here is the cover for your year-round food gardening.
Yes, latest one, best-selling garden book in Southeast Texas, easily. And my version of permaculture design principles and ethical principles. Basically, that's how we figure out how to design an organization or a garden or a bank, as far as that goes.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Me teaching a citrus class, I think we had 76 different kinds of citrus there that day for tasting, and citrus seeds actually will come true from seed pretty much. And so a lot of people collected seed. Farmers market there, I was at there Saturday morning. The fruit tree sale up above, probably sold $170,000 in 3 hours worth of fruit trees.
That's impressive. Whoops. Yeah, okay, well, that's what we have. Very good, Bob. Let's do this now. And what we want to have is Lois. Let me do this. Let me do this. And what I'm going to do now is read a little bio for Lois Arkin. She's in Los Angeles. Lois is an icon within the urban eco-village movement. She founded Los Angeles Eco Village, where she lives and works, in 1993. LAEV demonstrates higher quality living patterns for its 40 members, such as a radically reducing auto dependence and environmental impacts. She's a board member of the Global Eco Village Network in the United States and the Global Village Institute. Her current project, and when I first heard this, I just swooned for this. Her current project is transforming a brownfield former gas station on the Los Angeles Eco Village street into a multi-purpose community center using fungi to remediate contaminated soil. And companion to that project on the drawing boards is transforming a portion of one of their streets by the Eco Village into an urban farm and another street into a car-free pedestrian plaza. That's pretty awesome. Okay, Lois, please share your thoughts.
Hi, so nice to be with you, and thank you, Jen, for that introduction. One small change is that I'm actually on the board of the Global Eco Village Network for the United States, part of an international network of eco villages everywhere, and 5 different networks around the world. So great to be with you. Thank you, Bob. Thank you, Jan. Thank you, Jim. That's really great to be with you all. So I want to just first very briefly give you a overview definition of what is an eco-village anyway. So Robert Gilman, who was the editor with his wife of a magazine called In Context, which some of you may have known about it, it transformed into the magazine known as Yes, which is also being published today. And he came up with the definition of an eco-village, which many of us use all over the world because, as I said, we are a worldwide movement. And so the 6 qualities of an eco-village are: number 1, that they're human scale. They're small enough that people can know one another face to face. They are full featured, which in urban terms means that their land uses are mixed. You would never have to get into a private automobile to meet your basic needs. Number three, they support healthy human development in every way that you would want people to be healthy, besides just physically, mentally, spiritually, emotionally, and so forth. Eco-villages close the waste to resource loops and have multiple centers of initiative. So there's always a lot of things going on, just as there would be in any village that we all know about. So there's businesses and there's, churches or places of worship. There's also growing spaces and so forth like that. Multiple centers of initiative. And lastly, an eco-village can be successfully continued into the indefinite future. So these are all somewhat aspirational in goals for in the definition of an eco-village. And so we strive toward them. And that's what we've been doing in the Los Angeles Eco Village now for about 25 years. Founded in 1993 after the uprisings here in Los Angeles around the Rodney King verdict, where the Los Angeles Police Department officers were exonerated after the beating of Robert yes, after after that terrible thing that's been going on now, even worse all these many years. So, so what we've done in these 25 years or so is we have created a community land trust, which owns the land under 50 units of permanently affordable housing, 48 of those units of which are owned by a limited equity housing cooperative. So there is permanent affordability for all the households and families that live in this housing in a 2-block neighborhood. Around the intersection, you have visual access to the 2 blocks. The kinds of things, systems that we want to do, or shall we say the vision for our community, is to reinvent how we live in the city by essentially demonstrating higher quality living patterns at lower environmental impacts. And we do that by maximizing the beneficial connections both within and between the social, the economic, and the ecological systems of the neighborhood. And that's also essentially a description, another kind of description of what Bob described as permaculture. And that starts with the ecological systems, and you build up from that. And we are also long-term, as they call people that have been trained in permaculture, long-term permies here. And so that's kind of things that are demonstrated here. Not only socially that people are connected, we have a 40-member intentional community, and we have many gardens all around us. We have a quarter-acre learning garden. And then our most recent project, which I'll be talking more about probably later during this session, is a quarter-acre old auto repair shop, which is a brownfield. And for those of you who may not be familiar with that word, it's any kind of a property is a brownfield that is either actually polluted or it's perceived to be polluted. And in our case, it is polluted. We've had many environmental site assessments and studies. And so we know not only that it has a lot of residual hydrocarbons in the soil, but as well heavy metals. And here are some of the photos that Jen is going to show now. And then we'll be talking more later about other things that are happening there. Jen, did you want to say anything?
Just very briefly, what are we looking at here, Lois?
Well, where that arrow is, oh, there we go. That is the picture of our large building that you just passed by very quickly. That's a 40-unit building, which also has a community room and a bulk food co-op in it, and a bicycle parking room, and lots of gardens, both in front and in a courtyard, and in the front yards and in the side yards. And there is a building next door also. We're also a very big bicycling community. And so in the lower right here, you see their bicycle parking room. On the lower left, you see a permaculture design workshop going on. In the upper left, you see me giving a tour to, I believe, a group of people from, I'm not sure where they're from. They might be the National Association of City Transportation Planners, or it might be planners from Taiwan. I'm not sure. And then on the upper left here, you see the idea of closing a portion of our street down to make it a public plaza. And on the and then you can see on the larger picture on the right, you can see the courtyard where it says LA Eco Village, where there are a lot of plots. So a lot of people here have their individual plots, and then they have some community plots as well. So what else do we see there? Or is that about it?
Yeah, we're moving on, Lois. That
All
is
right.
absolutely awesome.
Thank you.
Very good. Wonderful. So next, I am going to introduce myself, and then that will be followed by Jim Schenk. So let
Hey,
me just...
Jan, your camera is off a little bit. We just see the top of your head.
Right, okay.
It's much better that way.
Yeah. Let me do this. A slight bit of technical items here. Okay, there
Looks
we
good.
go. Okay, great. So let me just introduce myself here. I'm Jan Spencer, and I live in Eugene, Oregon. And my interests are a convergence of urban land use, permaculture, economics, social uplift, and the environment. As Jim mentioned, I've been transforming my suburban property for over 20 years, and I produce a significant amount of food, energy, and water and aesthetics that's important on site. Literally thousands of people have visited over the years to see what suburbia can become. I've been on the board of my neighborhood association for 15 years. I produce a radio program called Creating a Resilient Future on a local station. And I have podcasts and links to YouTube presentations on my website, suburbanpermaculture.org. So here are my just brief comments here that I'd like to share. My core ideal is a sensible goal for humanity would be to live within the boundaries of the natural world and bring out the best in positive human potential. And that means reducing our ecological footprints and uplifting our own personal, social, and even spiritual worldviews, essentially trading the short-term thrill of affluence for long-term satisfaction and sustainability. Everyone has many allies and assets to work with for system change in your own homes and neighborhoods and communities. And finally, I believe positive human potential is our greatest renewable resource. And suburbia is one important location to put all these ingredients together. Half of all Americans live in suburbia. Millions of suburban homes have great potential for producing more basic needs on site. 2 of my 3 adjoining neighbors are well into permaculture right here over my backyard fence and my side fence. And over 20 years, transforming my suburban property has just absolutely been one of the greatest experiences of my life. And again, Bob's project in Houston was my inspiration for doing this. For example, here at my place, The south side patio is now an enclosed passive solar area that helps heat my house on chilly, sunny days. The garage was remodeled into a living space, and I built a detached living space behind the main house. Cars take up too much space. Having more people share a house and property helps reduce the eco footprint for everyone because there is reduced need to duplicate tools, appliances, and amenities. Thousands of people have visited here over the years to see what suburbia can become. One of the most important lessons is to connect with the natural world. I've gained much more of an awareness of what it takes to produce a useful amount of food and how much water that takes. Also, it's sobering to learn the amount of energy we use and how much effort that takes to produce that energy. Think of riding a bicycle up a hill as compared to driving a car. Affluence disconnects us from the real world, and reconnecting to the real world is critical for living sustainably. And there's a number of other people nearby in my neighborhood also into permaculture. We have site tours to show and tell what we're doing. Our neighborhood, our suburban neighborhood, hosted the 2015 Northwest Permaculture Convergence, a suburban permaculture convergence. That's a big conference. I'm on the board of my neighborhood association. I'm a great fan of neighborhood associations. A neighborhood association is one of the most important assets a neighborhood and a community can have. Those who participate help set the agenda. So if resilience, permaculture, and sustainability are part of the agenda, the assets and the platform of the neighborhood association can put that information out to a much wider audience than you could doing it by yourself. A neighborhood association can be a catalyst for a wide range of projects and initiatives. So what I'll do now is just show a few images. What we'll do here, that was that there. Right, what you see here is my neighborhood. This is a suburban neighborhood. And of course, the yellow rectangle, that's where my house is. Permaculture interest here, permaculture interest here. These are all places that have significant interest in permaculture in my neighborhood. This is a Google. Geez. Okay. And this image here shows my backyard. This is what my property looked like at the beginning when I moved in, a mid-50s small suburban house. And this is what my property, my backyard looked like. Passive solar, solar hot water, lots of food production, and edible landscaping. And just a few photos elsewhere on my property. I took out my driveway. I've got food growing where my driveway used to be. One picture here is what my place looks like from the street. Where I'm sitting is in that structure in the lower left-hand corner, and in the lower right-hand corner, of course, that's a tour group that's visited here, ecotourism. And in the neighborhood, a neighborhood church has created a big community garden. You see a picture of a site tour. That's location is just around the corner. That's a front yard food forest just around the corner. One image with the map, that's Eugene, and that's the neighborhood associations of Eugene. The city of Eugene has a neighborhood program. Lots of cities do. And then that's a lower left-hand corner that is a picture of the permaculture convergence. So I will say enough with that. And just in a second here, we'll have Jim. I'm going to read you a little bit of a intro to Jim Schenk. Jim Schenk lives in Cincinnati and is co-founder of Hilltop Community, formerly known as Enright Ridge Urban Eco Village. The Eco Village has significantly elevated the social, economic, and infrastructure condition on an average nothing special close to downtown neighborhood in Cincinnati. Jim has also been the guiding light for Imago, a nonprofit that educates about the value of nature and lifestyles that are eco-friendly. Much of the Eco Village is bordered by 37 acres of wooded land protected by the Imago Land Trust. And Imago has many other programs, educational events, a summer camp, and volunteer opportunities. That's a lot of work. Okay, Jim, go ahead.
Okay. Back in 1978, we found an organization, we co-founded Imago, looking at how we live if we held the earth as sacred as our most important priority, realizing that our present system sees economics as primary and humans as simply producers, consumers, and the earth as a resource. And so we're looking at how do we change that to reality, which is that the earth is primary. And we are one of 10 million species, and we do economics, we do religion, we do those things. That's what we humans do as a species. So we were an ecological education organization. We did a lot of workshops and presentations, and then finally decided we really needed to look at specifically walking our talk. So we started Enright Ridge Urban Eco Village back in 2004. And what we're looking at is how do we convert our cities? I mean, right now, over half of the people in the world live in cities. And how can we make them ecologically sensitive? And also the whole notion of community, that we really are a tribal animal. And the whole individualism concept in this culture is really quite crazy, because we really do need, we are a tribal animal, we really need to support each other. So in 2004, we decided to set up the Eco Village. I invited people in the neighborhood, and 17 people came together, and in June of 2004. And that evening, we brainstormed what we'd like to see in an Eco Village. And that evening, we started the Eco Village. And one of the advantages of an urban Eco Village like we're starting, which is in an existing neighborhood. Most of the houses here were built around 1920. So we don't have to start trying to figure out where we're going to be, how we're going to build the houses, et cetera, et cetera. That night, we started the Eco Village. And since then, we have basically been working with the neighborhood. And let's say about a third of the neighborhood now is involved with what we're doing. About a third are open and about a third indifferent. But we have very little opposition because we have basically have changed this neighborhood into a really neat place to live. And even people who aren't involved say, hey, you know, I'm not involved, but I can live with this. So we have done a lot of things over time. I mean, we started out putting out a newsletter because we didn't want people to feel like we were pulling the wool over their eyes. And so we started an Eco Village newsletter. We did a treasure mapping thing, which was to get people out to talk about what they would like to see in an Eco Village. And we had about 2/3 of the people in the neighborhood come out. And basically we had them do we had a 4x4 square a box that people brainstorm the kind of stuff they would like to see in the Eco Village. And out of this, we formed committees and have been doing a lot of work. I mean, we do gardening, potlucks. We have a soup club, a kitchen, chicken co-op. So there's a lot of things, and different people are doing different things and cluster in this neighborhood. We're on a street. Enright is actually 3/4 of a mile long, and which is not how you would develop an Eco Village. But basically, within these neighborhoods, different groups come together and support each other in doing a lot of different things. And this past December, my wife died. And not to be, a downer, but it really wasn't. I mean, I really miss her, but the community came together and were just amazingly supportive. And so the whole thing of developing a support for each other to live ecologically sensitive lives, but also to support each other. And one of the things that also is really important to me, as I tell people, we have thousands and thousands of residents of Enright Ridge Urban Eco Village. About 250 of them are human. And that community is much broader. We've got to see the earth as primary. So this is one of the things that we really focus on. I have written a book on the Eco Village. It isn't published yet, but I hope to make that available soon. So with that.
Very good. Let's just see a few pictures here, Jim. Tell us what we're looking at.
Yeah, the Eco Village now is on 4 streets. We started on Enright, and then we moved to Terry Street, and then to McPherson, and now a few years ago, we started on Wells Street. So that's the big base and a dead end street. So that's basically the Eco Village, those 4 streets.
And this is all the land trust here.
Now that's Imago has that land.
Right.
And you won't hear me say own, because we really can't own the land. We can't own the earth. It's an insane concept, but we're trying to be responsible for it.
You're looking after it.
And this is just people in the Eco Village. And this is just the bottom right. We have rehabbed about 25 to 30 houses in the Eco Village. There's a whole story behind that. The one on the bottom right is the house that's for sale right now. It's been totally renovated, and it's on the market for $82,000. And we put out a newsletter right side. And then we also have interns. And the 2 people on the left are interns working with compost.
And this is the Imago website. There is so much going on. I looked at the website, so many programs. This is a whole other project right here, Jim.
Yeah, I mean, as I said, it's an ecological education organization that we started in 1978, and it continues doing that.
Okay, that is great. I can't express enough what a joy it's been to be collaborating with Jim, Lois, and Bob, because we've been working together for some of these educational projects. So what I'd like to do now is for each one of the panelists to share a little vision. Just once again, imagine we're in a few years in the future, and people are beginning to gain these ideas. We're getting a little traction with the ideas of paradigm shift. So we're working on taking ideas that are just sort of in the imagination right now, but there's a greater chance that these new ideas that might seem a little bit out there at the present, that maybe they do gain more interest as a society. We start moving closer to paradigm shift and system change. So each one of us is going to share a couple of those visions in a minute or so for each vision. And then we're going to each share just a sentence that gives you a little more of an idea of what we're imagining, some of our own vision, and some of our own, a term would be a potential fiction becoming real. So, okay, Bob, go ahead.
Well, I would like to see wide recognition that we need to get serious about the threat of our food supply from climate change. All North Americans are at food risk in a few decades, and most have no idea how food gets to their markets or how climate governs the difference between harvest and no harvest. I would like to see quality food localization efforts that are organized, like Urban Harvest, like OBA here in Houston, across North America and the planet. I would also like to see permaculture taught widely and well across the planet, from kindergarten through college, and its spread accelerated. People are wasting large amounts of labor, materials, energy, and money because they don't do simple things like design labor efficiently, make use of energy and materials that arrive free at sites, and because they don't get multiple yields from spaces, connections, materials, and energy. They also don't design for the decades ahead. And government has been slow to help it happen. So I would like to see that change too. Short things, pay animal feed farmers to instead plant forests or prairies and sequester carbon instead of promoting greenhouse gas intensive agriculture. For food that can be grown locally, we should charge slowly increasing fees for imported food that competes with it. This would incentivize local food. Help get everyone to understand that all people deserve a fair share of education and support, and need it to pull their weight in making our world a better place for everyone. Low energy, low materials fun. Like low materials are fun things to do, like regenerative food gardening and sharing meals, highest quality food around a community. And trees need to be planted everywhere. That's about it.
That's a lot. And you know, people are working on almost all of that at some degree in very many, lots of different places already. So Lois, let's hear what you have to say.
Unmute. Wow, you know, you mentioned brownfields quite a bit, and I did too in my presentation. So we are doing the research to substantiate doing local remediation of brownfields, so that, you know, right now what people do when they've got a brownfield is they dig and haul the toxic soil away, and that makes it someone else's problem. What if neighborhoods learned how to remediate their toxic soils in their neighborhood, and were able to then reuse those that earth for, as Bob is encouraging, growing food and that sort of thing. So that's one thing, getting public policy, doing the science to create the public policy. So we're working also with the city's Department of Brownfields, and also with the UC Riverside Department of Environmental Toxicology. So we hope to have some public policy on that within the next year or two. We also hope to have some public policy on composting toilets. We have an ad hoc committee on composting toilets. We know that Southern California is a very much in and expecting more and more droughts. And so how can we do some substantial urban water saving? And that is by having composting toilets, which are perfectly safe, but we have to learn how to use them, and we have to provide the science to the city. So again, we're working with the Department of Building and Safety and the City Attorney's Office, and we'll have some demonstration urban composting toilets in the not so distant future. The third thing that I would say is that we have many, many residential streets, and I'm sure this is true in Houston and perhaps in Cincinnati and mega cities all over the world, where we have 5 and 6 lane streets, and maybe you see a car once every 10 minutes. So we need to start depaving a lot of those streets and transforming them not only into urban farms, but perhaps including tiny house villages and urban farms in those parking lanes in so many of our residential streets. And so that is something that I think we can make happen as a demonstration here in the Los Angeles 2-block eco-village neighborhood as well. And that about sums it up for my current a sampling of our current visions and actions toward implementing those visions.
Yeah, good. Thanks, Lois. I'll share a few of mine here. And again, this is in the not too distant future. Sounds out there, but I think these ideas definitely fit into paradigm shift and sustainability. Imagine in the not too distant future, a new kind of media service is emerging to fill a steadily growing need. Public interest groups and nonprofits are flocking to these new services that provide them with customized stories and information about sustainability projects and initiatives. And these organizations pass these stories on to their members by way of their websites, newsletters, publications, and Zoom presentations. That goes back to the idea that most public interest, environmental, social justice, equity organizations, we're all trying to repair the damage caused by our economic system and the consumer culture. And their jobs become easier as we, in a permaculture way, systematically begin to change the sources of our problems instead of the millions of examples of these problems. When we get to the source, which of course is our mega consumption economic system, then we begin to address all kinds of problems all at the same time. Imagine new legislation in the state of Oregon. Again, this is fiction. New legislation in the state of Oregon may be the first in the country to require businesses to start calculating the true cost of what they sell or services provided. It's no secret that externalizing the cost of products and services is the norm in our economy. What we pay does not come close to covering the social, public health, and environmental damage of our services. The new laws, still years out, would mean much higher prices for everything if our economic system was honest, but those changes would move us significantly towards sustainability. And here are several just short items. Public options, which are not-for-profit alternatives to for-profit services, are gaining traction in all economic sectors. Worker-owned and managed businesses are growing in size and number. Neighborhood youth corps are forming, often coordinated locally between schools, cities, neighborhood associations, faith groups, and various public interest groups. Permaculture general contractors are up and new coming professions, permaculture general contractors. Community center education programs are attracting increasing numbers of teachers and participants, all about learning ecological lifestyles. And again, bits and pieces of all of these are already happening, I know from a fact. So this isn't too far out there. Bits and pieces of all these ideas are already gaining traction. Okay, so let's hear from Jim.
Yeah, for me, one of the most important things is the whole idea of the urban areas becoming more ecologically sensitive. And I think the eco-village is one way of doing that. I think we both need to deal with the ecology, and we also need to deal with our tribal individualism thing is really a destructive thing. So how do we support each other to live sustainably? And I think the eco-village does that. If anybody wants, we're willing to consult with you if you want some ideas about what we did. Also, the whole concept of good paying jobs. We do not need good paying jobs. What we need are jobs that are meaningful and fulfilling, that that enhance the earth. That's what we need in terms of jobs. And I think that the whole thing with all this is the respect for elders, respect for children, and then the whole non-human community is essential. And one of the things that we're involved with is we're working on right now the rights of the Ohio River. The Ohio River is one of the most contaminated rivers in the country. And we need to recognize that other species, other have rights. Right now we give rights to corporations that don't even exist, but to this living entity all around us, we do not recognize. Another thing that I think that we will do, that we will in the future, this country will hold rights of nature. So.
Okay, well, this completes the more or less planned part of our panel and our presentation here. So I'm not the timekeeper, but I think that Jim Garrison mentioned, time permitting, that we would do a little bit of discussion among the panelists, and I would certainly invite and love to see Jim Garrison follow up with us as well. So that's what we can do for whatever time is available. And of course, I think after that, then we can move to some chat groups as well. So among the panelists, Bob, Lois, Jim, what would you say? First of all, you notice a lot of content about urban spaces that our cities and towns desperately need to become more ecologically sensible. And of course, permaculture can play a big part in that. Everybody here mentioned something about that. We're all into urban spaces. So other comments?
Bob, I wish you'd send some of that rain to LA. Thank you very much. That's amazing to imagine. And I know that there are places all over the world where they have lots of rain. So, so that's always a very big celebration here in LA. We walk down the street singing in the rain. So, so
Yeah.
that would be
well,
great.
I think it's safe to point out that our urban areas, particularly in the United States and particularly the Sun Belt, are made possible because of high technology, because of air conditioning. You could, almost the entire southern half of the United States really wouldn't exist if it weren't for major intervention with technology allowing these places to survive. I mean, we all want to see the best outcome as we move into the future, but I think it's past time to become a little bit more critical about what we've created and how do we get ourselves out of this mess.
Yeah, Scientific American, this last article, has an article on communities and how people in community have fared much better in the pandemic than a lot of other people. So I think that is true, that one common denominator that we all have is this whole notion of community, and community being more than just people, that we're connected to this amazing, amazing planet.
And also the neighborhood associations that you mentioned, Jim, quite a bit. Neighborhood and also Jan, neighborhood associations are so important, because that is not only within our communities will we be continuing to keep democracy alive and vital, but within our neighborhood associations, and building those relationships, continually building the trust that we have in one another, so that we don't fall into, you know, some kind of fascist plot to take over our country. It is the neighborhood associations that may ultimately save us from what some of these fascists have in mind for us.
Yeah, and many cities do have neighborhood associations, and some cities don't. But I know that one particular town in Washington State, Port Townsend, Washington, the county, mapping your neighborhood, which is an emergency disaster preparedness program. And it initially has a purpose just to get neighbors connected in case there's an earthquake, or in Port Townsend, you've got to be thinking about tsunamis also. It's right on Puget Sound. But some of the locals recognize an opportunity, and they have used that totally mainstream city program. Mapping Your Neighborhood can be found in lots of cities. but they've used a mainstream program for a much more ambitious agenda for community gardens, and they've created their own neighborhood associations, semi-independent of the city. But the point of this little story is that there's lots of community tools and opportunities to take mainstream existing structures and become much more radical with them. And neighborhood associations are one of those.
I would just add to that almost every one of these kinds of innovations benefits from some sort of an organization that has learned what others have found out in other parts of the nation and the world. That's true with eco-villages. It's true with community gardening programs. It's different to do a community garden from doing your own garden. You need to know something about what makes them work and what makes them fail. And different kinds of community gardens, ones at schools, ones in parks, ones at homeless shelters, they all have very different criteria. Universities and homeless shelters have very similar gardening programs, just as an example. And you would say, well, what, huh? The reason is they have very transient population, both universities and homeless shelters. So the sharing of information is difficult. And I guess what I'm saying is, and with what Lois was saying with Global Eco-Village Network, they have a lot of knowledge about how these things work and what you need to try to avoid. You still have to create your own local version of whatever it is, but by all, we never would have started a farmer's market if we hadn't learned how they did it in New Orleans. We spent 11 years just chasing whatever ideas people had locally, and then person who came in from New Orleans, and we interviewed them, found out how they did it, tried it, and worked perfectly. So I just want to say that groups can give you advantages that individuals can't quite do. And what Jan was saying about community associations, neighborhood associations, you know, if you're interested in organizing your neighborhood association to do that, might find out how they did it in Oregon.
Yeah, you participate and you help set the agenda, and that goes for all kinds of organizations. Jim, I see that you've appeared here. Your thoughts, please.
Well, I think, you know, you're all concluding this discussion on a very profound note around the relationship between small associations and civic organizations in relationship to democracy and the solidity of the very fabric of democratic governance. And I think it's important to just underscore the larger context and history to what you're all saying, particularly your comment, Lois, that it may be that these neighborhood associations are the final bulwark against rising tyranny. You know, they've done many studies that in different countries around the world, and there's a direct relationship between the number of voluntary networks and organizations in a society and democracy. And where they get broken down and people get atomized and isolated from each other, then you have the rise of misunderstanding. You have the rise of racism, sectarianism, xenophobia. So what we're discussing here is not only good for food, it's not only good for, you know, physical health, it's essential for social health.
And that's
essential
one
to
of
hold the basic fabric of our society together, particularly at times such as ours. As I indicated in the introduction, where there's an orchestrated assault on our democracy. So we need to think through organizationally, strategically, tactically, how do we withstand this? And voluntary associations are one of them. So I just wanted to indicate that, and would love, Lois, if you want to say anything more about that point, or Jim, Bob, Jan. I think it's an essential point for people to take in.
Yeah, and also to keep under consideration the fact that those organizations that are trying to impose tyranny upon us are also doing the same thing. So we've got to kind of increase our numbers and our participation in our local organizations so that we become stronger and stronger without becoming tyrannical, and so that we can actually defeat those others in ways that don't result in violence.
Well, one thought I have on that is that large numbers of people have had distressful interactions with groups they've been in, many of them in their own family that they grew up in. And they have difficulty very often when they get into a volunteer organization or voluntary association of trying to work with people. And so part of the thing that you have to figure out with an organization is how to get people not at each other's throats, but rather focused on the prize, on what you're really the vision. Because if you get people working together, you can get your vision done. And if they're at each other's throats, nothing happens. And a lot of times the throat is really not really somebody who's there, it's somebody who was there 25 years ago that is bothering them. And so the distress patterns that people have, you need to do some research on what they are and figure out how to get some positive work out of people that otherwise cause problems. They're all potential assets to an organization, but somebody who is dishonest might still be useful, but you just have to not put them in a place where they're going to upset people. And if they have bad people skills, maybe something they're by themselves. But what I'm saying is that when you design an organization, you have to look at people's strengths and weaknesses, possibly help them with whatever the weakness is, but also not put them in a place where they jeopardize the organization because of their weakness.
Yep.
And that's the key. That's a community garden, that's an eco village, that's anything. It's a US government also, I should add, that there's way too much of this kind of stuff.
Well, that's I think an important item that we, as a skill that we all could improve on is, as is alluded to here, our own communication skills. How do we interact in a way with others that is collaborative? And I know there are people who teach that. Nonviolent communication, sociocracy, these are things I'm not super acquainted with myself, but in order to learn these types of communication skills, we got to make choices with what we do with our own time and our own money. And of course, we live in a distraction economy, and there's not much money to be made by people interacting with each other and looking for and actively creating alternatives to the mainstream. There's not a lot of money in that. People have to engage themselves and their neighbors and their communities and neighborhood associations and learn these skills and say, I'm going to put my time and my money over here instead of over here, because I'd like to see a sustainable, sensible, peaceful future.
Yeah, and I would be amiss if I didn't mention that part of our community right now is demanding we pay attention. Probably the oldest insect in the world, possibly the 17-year cicada, is singing and, really drawing our attention to the fact that the rest of this earth is really important, and they want everyone to recognize that.
Yeah, that's a good point. There's been stuff in the news where people have been hearing the cicadas and they call 911. Hear nature singing and they call 911. That's a measure of how disconnected we all are to the larger ecosystem. Wonderful point. Wonderful point.
I was once at a Continental Bioregional Congress, and we had a man who had us having something called an All Beings Congress and asked us to represent some being other than a human in a Congress, be an advocate, representative, lobbyist. So I was a forest nematode, standing up for the rights, because they don't get the vote, and you can bulldoze a forest but it sounds crazy, but there are plenty of lobbyists operating down there in Washington and most other parts of the world trying to influence it. Why isn't, and we even have things like the Sierra Club and whatever trying to lobby for this and that, but why not? Why shouldn't forests have a representative or a clout? And why shouldn't black bears have some sort of rights? We're gonna all lose if we don't. So
Totally.
Well, I do believe there is a bio rights movement, and I forgot exactly which country actually has enabled legislation around bio rights. I think some country in
Bolivia,
South-
Ecuador.
In Ecuador.
Thank you. Yes.
Even in China, they've written into the Constitution what they call ecological civilization.
Wow.
And,
Yeah. So
there's
we
a lot of
have some catching up to do.
there's a lot of catching up to do, but it's the whole rights of nature is a growing movement to do exactly what you just said, Bob, to embed in the legal systems the fact that nature and biodiversity has inalienable rights just like people.
mm-hmm.
Absolutely. One other point that I'd like to have you all comment on, and that is, as we traverse this pandemic, what is under assault is our public health in a very fundamental, immediate way. Countries around the world have been rolling out the vaccinations, which have a certain utility. But the much more fundamental challenge, I think, for humanity is to regain its own natural capacity to enhance our own immune systems naturally. Because if we weren't in a world where you call 911 because of a cicada singing in the night, and we were all involved in local gardens and permaculture and urban land use, you can imagine how strong our bodies would be, because our spirits would be strong, because we'd be working collaboratively together to produce abundant, healthy food in a neighborly way. So I would just love, as we close, to have just final comments from all of you on this notion of how we use our little plots of land and our little neighborhood associations to strengthen our immune systems and public solidarity.
Well, if I may, what we know is that aside from our genetic inheritance inheritance, which sometimes overrides our best of intentions, is that diet, exercise, and social engagement are the three most important aspects of health.
Yeah.
And that is what we essentially have in intentional communities such as eco-villages and so forth like that. So that's what we need to work on. And even within our communities, yes, I still see people come back from the market a block away with junk food, and it like drives me crazy. But you know, we all get guilty of that. There's a tremendous article, I think it was in the New York Times yesterday, on how the big food corporations have caused our addictions to all of this sugar and fat-laden and sugar, fat, and salt-laden foods.
Definitely.
And that they intentionally have designed these food systems to make us addicted. And so we have to collectively fight against that and help one another, just as people do in Alcoholics Anonymous, help one another, you know, bypass these addictions. So that's my take on it. Food, diet, exercise, and social engagement, and let's keep at it.
Beautifully put, Lois. Thank you.
I would add to that that the science is backing this up in major ways. About 2000, there were something like under 1,000 peer-reviewed studies of gut microbes. And in 2015, there were 14,000 worldwide peer-reviewed studies of gut microbes, because people have figured out that proper microbes in the gut create all sorts of healthy conditions, and that they have tracked down what it is that does that. And I'm an anthropologist, and guess what? Pretty much the diets that people had long before potato chips. And yeah, I mean, people did exercise once in order to get their food, and yes, they ate minimally refined grains and roots and fruits and vegetables, and that's what they mostly ate: high fiber, low sugars, low starches, so on. And it turns out that they're linking that. And another interesting thing is that some of the mechanisms are very common in plant roots that are also in our gut. They're very similar. And what the microbes do in both cases are very similar. Most of this the last 20 years with electron microscopes that they've tracked this down. But I'll just say one other thing. They've now found that almost every plant that has root hairs on its roots basically eat microbes. They eat a bacteria. They're bacteriophages. That's what they do with their root hairs. And so basically the difference between plants and animals is getting blurred the more they look at what microbes are doing. And even between humans and trees. So anyway, I just say that what Lois said is the science is moving that way. And just like smoking in the 50s was, still widely advertised, what's going to happen with all this crap that they keep trying to sell us, junk food, it's going to have the same thing. They're going to have to ban it.
Yeah,
And
eventually.
yeah.
Good. Thank you, Bob. Thank you so much.
Jim.
Yeah.
Let's hear Jim.
Yeah, the whole concept of loneliness, isolation, I think individualism, mobility is just crazy. And we really need to stay in space. We really need support. And David Abrams, one of the things he says is that our brains are really small. They evolved to where we could walk to and back in one day. And so we really need a culture that supports us. And I think, having like an eco-village or a community of people who supports us in the way we eat, the way we live is really essential.
Thank you.
Yeah, a comment I would make, and I certainly appreciate everybody. Wow. As mentioned before, addressing closer to the source of so many of these different problems is, I just have to go back to the economic system, the profit motive. Junk food makes more money than healthy food. People deserve better than capitalism and the consumer culture. The planet deserves better than capitalism and the consumer culture. So what we do with our own time and money, our neighborhood associations, some type of useful volunteered program group to become a part of. What we need to do is to create a culture and an economic system that fits within the boundaries of the natural world and brings out the best and positive human potential. We don't have that right now, but we do have the choice to make that happen in our own homes, our own neighborhoods, and the more people who do it, the better.
Thank you, Jan. Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Bob. Thank you, Lois. This has been splendid. You really are inspiring individuals, each and every one of you in the communities out of which you come. And there was something that Leo Jacoby put in the chat. He said that the key crop of eco-villages is community relationships. And I think you've exemplified that in the heartfulness with which you've presented your projects in your respective areas of living and work. And if there's a one size fits all solution that could be adopted globally, it's this. Think about it, everyone. Just for a moment, of all the solutions out there, and there are many, and they're all important at different scales. But at the bottom line and the bottom rung, if all of us would come together in little community associations and grow little local plots of land for food and share at the farmers markets, that's something that people can do anywhere they live, anywhere in the world, even in urban areas, as you've seen today. The extraordinary irony of our crisis is that we're going off the collective cliff into our own perdition at a moment when the solutions are so simple that it almost defies belief that we don't see them.
Amen.
So, I really want to thank you for sharing with us the obvious. And this is a great way to start a Monday morning here in California. So thank you, everyone. And then tomorrow, we're going to continue this basic theme of regeneration and solutions. Leslie Southwick Trask and Kurt Kruger are going to be convening our next Peace Lab. We're going to be talking to a couple folks on the shapes that shape us, drawing from the shapes in outer space and the shapes of Mother Earth, and how that can help the architectural scaffolding for the peace that we so desperately seek. And this is important. The G7 meets this week in Europe. President Biden and the leaders of the major industrial powers are meeting, and they're trying to sort out how we rejuvenate international relations around the thematic of peace. So that's going to be the theme of tomorrow on Humanity Rising. And then on Wednesday, we're going to be looking at Biden's military and foreign policy as the G7 meets so that we can keep relevant and timely to the unfolding of world events. You're all welcome to the after session chat. You'll see the link in the chat box. Also want to remind everybody that Kate Rayworth, her Fundamentals of Donut Economics is starting on Wednesday. We have several hundred people that have signed up from literally all over the world to jumpstart our Masters in Regenerative Action as Ubiquity and University of International Cooperation and the Donut Experimental Action Lab and 20 or 30 other organizations all around the world come together to reinvent the MBA. No longer can we think about business administration and business as usual. Business is now that has to engage in regenerative action. And what you've seen today with Lois and Bob and Jim and Jan is the kind of grassroots regenerative action that could actually save the world if we would allow it and enable it and celebrate it. It starts right in our backyards. So thank you, everyone. See you here tomorrow, same time, same station on Humanity Rising. Bye for now.
Oh.